Your destiny is reflecting in the chrome surfaces of the future, waiting for you to step up and claim it. Explore the powerful stories of those who took control of their fate and changed everything. Click subscribe now and start building your own cinematic legacy.
My mother has a way of looking at me that makes me feel like furniture. Not invisible exactly. Furniture gets noticed when it's in the way. More like a lamp that's always been in the corner. Useful when needed. Easy to forget otherwise. Her name is Diane. My father is Gerald. My older sister is Brooke. And I am Claire. For most of my life, that introduction told you everything you needed to know about our family hierarchy. Diane and Gerald had 2 daughters, but anyone watching us at Sunday dinner would assume they had one. Brooke sat at the center of every conversation, every decision, every dollar. I sat slightly to the left of all of it, passing the breadbasket and listening. I want to be fair. Brooke isn't a monster. She's charming, actually. The kind of person who makes you feel like the most interesting person in the room when she's talking to you. The problem is, she always believed her own performance. She grew up hearing how exceptional she was and eventually stopped questioning whether it was true. I grew up hearing a different set of things. Not cruel things. My parents weren't cruel people. It was subtler than that. It was my father saying, well, Brooke tested into the gifted program when someone asked about his kids, as if that sentence answered the question about both of us. It was my mother forgetting to mention I'd been accepted to nursing school until after she'd thrown Brooke a party for her marketing degree. It was years of small omissions that added up to one large message. You're fine, Claire. You're just not Brooke. So I became quiet. Not the kind of quiet that comes from sadness, though there was some of that, but the kind that comes from watching. I paid attention. I learned things. I saved money while Brooke spent hers. I read contracts while Brooke signed things without looking. I asked questions while Brooke made announcements. It would take 11 years, a foreclosure notice, a forged signature, and one very expensive piece of real estate for any of that to matter. Let me start with the house. My grandmother, my father's mother, Ruth, died when I was 26. She and I had been close in the way that skipped generations sometimes are. She taught me to play gin rummy. She told me stories about working as a bookkeeper in the 1970s, about teaching herself tax law from library books because no one would hire a woman with her knowledge. She called me every Sunday until she couldn't anymore. When she died, she left behind a duplex in Asheville, North Carolina that she'd owned outright since 1991. 2 units, fully rented, generating quiet, steady income every single month. Nothing flashy, just solid. She left it to me. I found out at the reading of the will, sitting in a lawyer's office with my parents and Brooke, who had taken a long weekend to fly in from Chicago, where she'd moved after a series of opportunities that never quite materialized. The lawyer read the bequest. My mother's expression didn't change. My father cleared his throat. Brooke looked at me for the first time all morning. That's the Meriwether Street property, my father said, as if confirming coordinates. Yes, the lawyer said. Grandma Ruth always said that property would stay in the family, Brooke said. She laughed a little, like she was making a joke. I didn't know she meant Claire specifically. I didn't say anything. I signed the paperwork. I drove home and sat in my car for a long time. My grandmother had known exactly what she was doing. She'd updated that will 14 months before she died. After a long phone call with me about compound interest and rental yields and whether I thought the Asheville market had peaked, she left Brooke a set of pearl earrings and a savings bond worth $4,000. She left my parents her china cabinet and her written-off Buick. She left me the thing that would quietly grow. For 2 years, I told no one what I did with that inheritance. I managed the duplex carefully. One unit I kept rented to the same retired school teacher who'd been there since 2018, and the other I renovated slowly, on weekends, learning as I went. I refinanced strategically. I took the equity and used it as a down payment on a small single-family rental in the same zip code. Then another. I kept my day job as a surgical nurse. I kept my apartment. I kept my life looking exactly the same from the outside. I did not post about this on social media. I did not mention it at Thanksgiving. I brought wine and listened to Brooke talk about her latest venture, a lifestyle brand, a consulting practice, a dropshipping business that was about to scale. My parents funded all of it, not dramatically, not all at once, but consistently. A loan here, a gift there. My father remortgaging the family home in Chapel Hill to give Brooke capital for the consulting practice, which lasted 8 months before the clients dried up. I knew about the remortgage because my mother mentioned it once. in passing, with the tone of someone reporting mild weather. Your father took out a line of credit against the house to help Brooke get started, she said. You know how these things go. I did know how these things went. I just said nothing. The house in Chapel Hill was the home I grew up in. 4 bedrooms, a screened porch, a magnolia tree in the backyard my father planted the year I was born. My parents had owned it outright. Or had owned it outright. Before the line of credit. Before the second draw on that line. Before the third. By the time Brooke announced she was launching a real estate investment company, I am not making this up, my parents had approximately $60,000 of equity left in a home worth $420,000. I found this out because my father called me in November, and for the first time in my memory, he sounded small. We're having a little cash flow issue, he said. The payments on the line of credit are, we may be overextended slightly. I asked him how much they owed on the property. He told me. The number was not small. I asked him whether Brooke knew. He was quiet for a moment. Brooke has her own pressures right now, he said. The new company is at a critical stage. I told him I understood. I told him I look into some options. I did not tell him what I already knew, which was that the lender on their line of credit was a regional bank that had, 6 weeks earlier, bundled a portfolio of distressed residential loans and sold them to a private investment LLC. The LLC was mine. I want to explain how that happened, because it matters. 18 months before my father's phone call, I had been approached by a small loan brokerage about a portfolio acquisition opportunity. A regional bank in the Carolinas was looking to offload a batch of underperforming residential lines of credit. Homeowners who were behind. Homeowners who were overextended. Homeowners who had overextended. Homeowners who had borrowed against equity and were struggling to service the debt. The portfolio was priced at a significant discount. The upside was acquiring the underlying debt and either working with borrowers toward resolution or, in default scenarios, proceeding to the foreclosure process. It was not a glamorous business. It was a careful one. I had incorporated an LLC the previous year, Meridian Residential Holdings, which I chose specifically because it sounded like it could be anyone. I had a lawyer. I had a CPA. I had by then enough equity across my properties and enough operating history to qualify for the financing. I did not know my parents' loan was in that portfolio when I bought it. I found out 3 weeks after closing, when my property manager sent me the full loan files for review. I was sitting at my kitchen table on a Tuesday night after a 12-hour shift, going through the list, and there was the address. The Chapel Hill house. The magnolia tree. I sat with that for a long time. I could have called my father that night. I could have told him. There was a version of me, the version who still flinched at my mother's silences, who still brought wine to Thanksgiving, who still hoped that someday the lamp in the corner would get noticed. That almost did. Instead, I called my lawyer. We went through my options. I was not obligated to disclose my ownership to the borrowers. The loan was legitimate, the acquisition was legitimate, and my parents were not in default yet. But they were 61 days behind on payments, and if they hit 90, I would have grounds to begin formal proceedings. What do you want to do? My lawyer asked. I want to know everything first, I said. So I watched. I reviewed the loan history. I saw the draws. The first one for Brooke's consulting firm, the second for operating expenses, the third for what was listed as investment capital, which I suspected meant Brooke's new real estate company, which was deeply ironic in a way I did not find funny yet. And then, in January, my father called again. He had received a notice of default from the lender. He was confused. The address on the letter wasn't the bank's address. It was a P.O. box in Charlotte. He wanted to know if it was a scam. It was not a scam. I told him to forward me the letter. I told him I would look into it. I called my lawyer and told her to prepare a formal borrower outreach letter. Standard language. Meridian Residential Holdings. Options for resolution. 2 weeks later, my parents hired a real estate attorney of their own. There were calls between lawyers. During this period, I flew home for what my mother called a family meeting, which I understood to mean a meeting where everyone would look at me because I was the one with nursing money and no apparent financial complications. Brooke flew in from Chicago again. She had driven this time. I noticed the new car in the driveway. I noticed it was a lease. I noticed because I noticed things. We sat in the living room. The magnolia tree was visible through the front window. My mother had made coffee. Nobody was drinking. My father explained the situation. He used words like complicated and temporary, and the lender is being aggressive. Brooke listened with the expression she uses when she's calculating. Then she sat forward and said, with complete confidence, that she had a plan. The plan was this. Her new real estate investment company was about to close on a significant deal that would generate enough capital to pay off the line of credit entirely. She had an investor. The deal was solid. She just needed 60 days. My father looked relieved. My mother nodded, like this was exactly what she'd expected to hear. I asked what the deal was. Brooke explained it. A commercial property in Asheville, interestingly enough. A mixed-use building. Her investor was putting in the capital. She was managing the acquisition. They'd split the returns. She said it with the fluency of someone who had read 2 books about real estate investing and watched some YouTube videos. I asked who the investor was. She named someone. A man she'd met through a networking event. I asked if she'd done a background check. She said she didn't need to. She knew him personally. I asked if she had a written operating agreement. She looked at me the way she's been looking at me my whole life. The way that says, "Why are you always doing this, Claire?" "It's handled," she said. My mother made a small sound of agreement. My father straightened his shoulders. The meeting was over. I drove back to my hotel. I called my lawyer. I asked her to run a background check on the name Brooke had given me. He had 2 prior LLCs, both dissolved. One had a civil judgment against it for failure to deliver on a partnership agreement. He was not, as far as anyone could confirm, currently capitalized to invest in anything. I emailed this information to Brooke that night. I kept it factual. I included the public records as attachments. I said I thought she should know before the 60 days ran out. She did not reply. 43 days later, the investor stopped returning her calls. My parents hit 90 days past due. The formal default process began. My lawyer sent the notice. And that is when Brooke did the thing that changed everything. I only found out because of a phone call from my property manager who handled tenant communications for my Asheville properties. She called me on a Wednesday afternoon, confused. Someone had contacted her claiming to be a representative of the debt holder for my parents' loan. They had called asking about the properties on Meriwether Street, specifically about whether the current LLC owner had other assets, and whether there were arrangements to be made. The caller had identified themselves as acting on behalf of someone named Brooke. I called my lawyer immediately. She started making inquiries. What emerged over the following week was this. Brooke had somehow obtained partial documentation about Meridian Residential Holdings. Not enough to know I owned it, but enough to know it was a small private LLC. She had apparently decided the best strategy was to contact the LLC directly and propose some kind of negotiated settlement. And in doing so, she had submitted a document to my property manager's office purporting to show that my parents had made 3 payments they had not, in fact, made, falsified bank statements, modified in a way that a first-year forensic accountant would catch in about 4 minutes. She sent these documents to the office of the entity that owned the debt. She sent fabricated financial records to me. My lawyer said, "You understand what she just did." I said I did. Wire fraud, fraudulent misrepresentation, submission of falsified documents in a debt resolution proceeding. My lawyer listed the relevant statutes the way other people read grocery lists. I sat with it for 3 days. I did not call Brooke. I did not call my parents. I went to work. I did my job. I came home. I thought about a lot of things. The lamp in the corner, the bread basket, Sunday dinners, the magnolia tree my father planted the year I was born. On the 4th day, I called my lawyer and told her what I wanted to do. I did not want to file criminal charges. I want to be clear about that. Not because Brooke deserved protection, she didn't, particularly, but because my parents were still in that house, and they were old, and whatever they had failed to give me over the years, I was not the person who was going to put their daughter in handcuffs. What I wanted was resolution. My lawyer contacted Brooke's attorney, because Brooke had, by then, hired one, and laid out the situation with the specificity of someone who has all the documentation and knows it. We are aware of the submitted documents. We have the originals for comparison. We are prepared to refer this matter to the appropriate authorities. Alternatively, we are prepared to discuss a structured resolution. The structured resolution was this. My parents would execute a deed in lieu of foreclosure, voluntarily signing the property over to Meridian Residential Holdings in exchange for full discharge of the debt and no deficiency judgment. In return, Meridian would offer them a 12-month lease at below-market rent, giving them time to find alternative housing. I would cover the property taxes for that period. The falsified documents would not be referred to law enforcement, provided Brooke signed a full acknowledgement of what she had done and a release of any future claims against Meridian or its owners. Brooke's attorney came back twice trying to negotiate. My lawyer did not move. The signing happened on a Thursday in March. My parents' attorney was there. My lawyer was there on behalf of Meridian. Brooke flew in. I was also there. I walked in and my mother looked up and her face did something complicated. Surprise, then confusion. Then the slow recalculation of someone who has just understood something a beat too late. My father went very still. Brooke stared at me from across the table with an expression I had never seen on her before. It looked actually like respect. Or maybe just the recognition of an equal. Hard to say. "You're Meridian," my father said. "Not a question." "I am," I said. My mother opened her mouth. She closed it. She looked at the table. Brooke said quietly, "How long?" "The portfolio acquisition closed 14 months ago," I said. "I didn't know your loan was in it until 3 weeks after closing." "And then you just—" She stopped. "And then I tried to reach a resolution," I said. No one said anything for a moment. My lawyer set the documents on the table. The deed in lieu, the lease agreement, the acknowledgement for Brooke. Everything in order, everything clean. My father picked up his pen. His hand was steady, which surprised me. He signed. My mother signed. Brooke signed her acknowledgement last, without looking at me. My lawyer collected everything, checked each page, slid it all into her folder. I stood up. I picked up my bag. "The lease starts April 1st, I said. 12 months, as agreed. I'll have someone reach out about the handover process." I looked at my mother. She was looking at the window, at the magnolia tree, at the yard she'd had for 30 years. She didn't look at me. I looked at my father. He looked at me. He looked like someone standing at the bottom of something very deep, trying to understand how we got there. I didn't explain it to him. There wasn't anything to explain. He already knew. I looked at Brooke last. She met my eyes. I don't know what she saw in mine. I hope it was something like clarity, the kind you get when you've spent a long time being the one who pays attention, and finally the paying attention is visible to everyone in the room. I walked out through the front door. The afternoon was cold and clear, the kind of March day that can't decide if it's still winter. I stood on the porch for a moment, the screened porch where I used to read during summers, where the furniture has been the same since 1998. Then I walked to my car. I did not look back at the house. I drove to Asheville that night. I parked in front of the Meriwether Street duplex, the one my grandmother left me. And I sat there for a while in the dark. The retired school teacher in Unit A had her lights on. There were wind chimes on her porch that Ruth had installed sometime in the 90s and that I had never had the heart to take down. I thought about my grandmother teaching herself tax law from library books. I thought about her calling me every Sunday. I thought about the way she used to say, when I was maybe 10 years old, sitting across from her at the gin rummy table, "You're the one who watches, Claire. Watching is how you learn what everyone else misses." I didn't think about Brooke's face when I walked into that room. I didn't think about whether my mother would ever call me. I didn't do the math on what had been given and what had been withheld, and whether any ledger like that could ever actually balance. I just sat there with the wind chimes and the dark and the thought that I had done what I'd set out to do, cleanly, legally, without cruelty, without warning. My parents have 7 months left on their lease. After that, I haven't decided. Maybe I'll extend it. Maybe the 12 months will have been enough time for everyone to figure out next steps. I'm not interested in putting anyone out. I was never interested in that. I was interested in that. I was interested in being seen. Whether that happened or not, I honestly couldn't tell you. My mother still hasn't called. My father sent a text that said, "I didn't know you'd become this," and I've read it probably 40 times trying to decide how to feel about it. I think he meant it as an accusation. I think it might also be a kind of awe. Brooke emailed me 2 weeks after the signing. 3 sentences. "I underestimated you. I think I always did. I'm sorry. I read it once. I didn't reply. Not because I don't forgive her. I think I might, eventually, in the slow way you forgive things that were never really about you. But because I've spent a long time answering when people needed something from me and I wanted to know what it felt like to leave one unanswered. It felt like walking out of a room with good posture. It felt like wind chimes on a porch that belonged to someone who always believed in the one who watches. It felt for the first time in a very long time, exactly like enough. There's something people don't tell you about being overlooked for a long time. It teaches you a kind of patience that can't be faked. Not the passive kind, Not the patience of someone who has simply given up, but the active kind. The kind where you're still moving, still building, still learning, just doing it somewhere no one thinks to look. That's what Claire did. For years, she was the daughter who passed the breadbasket, the one who asked questions no one wanted to answer, the one whose name came second or not at all, and instead of performing loudly to get noticed, she went quiet and went deep. She learned how money works. She learned how debt works. She learned how equity compounds when no one is spending it on someone else's bad ideas. That's not luck. That's not circumstance. That is a choice made over and over in small rooms, alone, when no one was watching. Every decision she made, to save instead of spend, to read the contract instead of sign it, to build instead of borrow, was a vocast for a future version of herself that her own family didn't believe existed. And here's what I keep thinking about. Brooke didn't fail because she was unlucky. Brooke failed because she confused confidence for competence, and she had a family around her that never asked her to tell the difference. When everything you want is handed to you before you've earned it, you never develop the internal architecture to hold it. You get titles without understanding. You get capital without discipline. And eventually, the gap between who you perform yourself to be and who you actually are becomes wide enough to fall through. The same goes for the parents, not out of cruelty. They loved their daughters in their way, but they operated on a kind of favoritism that felt like safety and turned out to be erosion. Every dollar they poured into Brooke's next venture was a dollar borrowed against something real. Every time they dismissed Claire's questions at that table, they were making a choice. Choices accumulate. They compound too, just not always in the direction you'd hope. What strikes me most about Claire's story isn't the moment she walked into that signing room. It's the 14 months before it. 14 months of knowing and saying nothing and doing the work of someone who intends to resolve things correctly rather than dramatically. She didn't expose anyone. She didn't make a scene. She built the legal and financial structure to offer her parents an exit that kept their dignity intact. And she did it while working 12-hour shifts and driving home alone in the dark. That is what intelligence looks like in practice. Not test scores, not titles. The ability to see clearly, plan carefully, and act with precision when the moment finally arrives. And that is what integrity looks like too. Because she could have walked away from her parents' debt the moment she found it in that portfolio. She didn't. She stayed in it, worked through it, and found the most humane path forward that the situation allowed. If there's anything worth taking from all of this, it's simply that the work you do quietly, in private, without applause or acknowledgement is still work. It still counts. The lamp in the corner still gives light. And sometimes, after a very long time, the room finally turns around and notices it was never dark because of the lamp at all.